And as one season gave way to another, Odie's days were winding down. He was getting old, and here he is sitting next to the wood stove in his bed. This is exactly the way he liked to sit there, almost like a person. He wasn't the bravest of dogs. He was basically afraid of his own shadow. He was fine with me out in the woods hiking around with him, but come nightfall, he wanted to be in his bed next to the wood stove, especially, of course, in the wintertime. And he passed away in my lap just days after uh, it had turned the year 2000, which, as many of you may remember, there was a lot of anxiety around when the clock clicked over to 2000. Y2K was supposed to be a thing, and there was going to be all kinds of mayhem. The cities were going to evacuate. There would be shortages of everything, and the masses would be heading for the hills, which really made the poaching activity and the people that were involved with that ramp up their activities to keep the supposed influx of masses out of that area. And even though Odie was gone, Booger was just coming into his prime, a natural protector of everything on the property, any kind of animal. It did not matter. Here you can see a couple of turkeys and a rabbit behind him. And of course, the people. He knew the boundaries of the property, and he just wanted to protect everybody, every animal, and he took that responsibility seriously. He considered all animals there part of his flock, and as coyotes would come in here and try to pick off some of the birds, he could keep them at bay, and he did. He was just an amazing protector, came by all of it with just instinct, was never have to be trained about anything. He just knew exactly what to do, and if there was any kind of danger, he would herd these animals, no matter what kind they were, back to an area of safety. And consequently, all the animals on the property loved Booger as well, and they knew that he was there to protect them. First thing in the morning, he would run up and check how everything was doing as they would start to wake up. But Booger always wanted to be outside. He never wanted to be in the cabin, no matter what the temperature was or what the weather was. He had a job to do, and he wanted to make sure he was always out there to make sure everybody was okay. One time, the pigs had escaped from their pen, and with that newfound freedom, they headed deep into the woods very quickly, having so much fun, just knocking everything over that they possibly could along the way, and just tearing up the forest floor, looking for whatever they might find underneath the pine needles. And they got to be about a quarter of a mile away from the cabin, and I just did not know how I was going to get them back into their pen. And Booger, once again, without any training whatsoever, although it took him a while, he just kept nipping at their back legs every time they started heading deeper into the forest, and slowly but surely he got them worked back uphill, and he actually put them back into the pen to where all I had to do was close the gate that they had busted out of. That was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen, since he had uh, just instinctual of how to do that. I had never trained him at all, but he could put those pigs right back in their pen. So they got to free range for one glorious day. He loved his pigs, and I'm telling you, those pigs loved him. Anytime he would bark at something, one time I did have a bear come sniffing around interested in the pigs, and Booger was able to chase that bear off. It was kind of a small bear, but at his first bark, I mean, those pigs' ears perked up and they quickly ran into their little house that was built for them, and they waited till Booger's bark had changed and gave them the all clear, and then they could come out and thank him for that. So by this time, the poaching activity had increased uh, dramatically as several of these poachers that were aligned with each other were trying to take over a 4 mile stretch of road along the backs of a lot of our properties. And instead of just being seasonal now, some of them were living there full time. So the poaching operation was now 24/7. Every day of the week, they cruised up and down those roads, checking their traps, decimating the wildlife beyond what that little ecosystem could sustain by far. There was a lucrative fur trade going on back in there, and they had effectively taken over a 4 mile stretch of road. There was a total of 6 of them participating in this activity that I was able to identify over the years. And they were grinding down the population of every species out there, everything. I mean, bears, mountain lions, bobcats, fox, all the way down the food chain. There was a bounty on coyotes at this time. So, of course, every coyote everywhere out there was basically being shot on sight if could be, and of course, trapped. But a lot of the other furs that were being trapped and animals that were being trapped, it was an illegal thing, but the illegal furs sold for more money, which was sad. And the campaign of terror went from posting signs with these guys' manifestos on the sign, 4x8 sheets of plywood anchored into the ground by 4x4 posts up and down that 4 mile stretch of road, warning everybody that danger was up at the road if they continued past the signs, and just long-winded manifestos of their philosophy and intimidating anybody who would read it. It wasn't able to deter us who lived out there, and sometimes they were so brazen as to post those signs on my property, which I would immediately take down, and then they would just move further down the road. Eventually, they had a 4 mile stretch of road heavily posted with really crazy, scary looking signs. People would be shot if they went any further. And mind you, this was a subdivision that had lots for sale. And what they were trying to do, and it worked largely, was intimidate anybody from ever coming back there, and of course buying any lot next to them, but even back in this area that they had really deemed was all of their territory. It did not faze us who lived back there. When their signs with their manifestos failed to intimidate the people that were living back there, they took a more drastic measure and started bringing in heavy equipment and trying to block the subdivision roads, which of course was illegal. These were roads that were used by ranchers that had been out there for generations to move their cows to higher pastures. During certain times of the year, we all were supposed to have access to these roads because they were public subdivision roads, and legally they were to be remained open for emergency vehicles, fire crews, emergency ambulances, police, whatever were supposed to be coming through here. Now, this had been reported to the authorities when their first attempt was to build a huge mound of dirt across this road to try to block it completely. We simply, who lived out there, drove around that. People that didn't know the area, or if they were coming to visit somebody, or even emergency vehicles, they simply would turn around where the road was blocked. So we wore paths ourselves who lived there around this area or around these blockades. Then they knocked the mound down, erected a gate. We went around the gate, and then they constructed with a backhoe a moat off of each side of the gate, leading deeper into the forest, about 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep, so we could not drive around there anymore. And then it started heating up a little bit more. And on the earlier video that I made a while back on the bear incident of '01, this is a fine gentleman named George. Um, he didn't take kindly to these roads being built. He'd lived back there longer than anybody, uh, much longer than any of those poachers even knew that this area existed. So George was quite upset about these roads being blocked and blocking his access to get to where he needed out there. And he went down one day and had some words with them at that gate while they were putting it in. He bumped into it with his car in a rage. Um, and of course, he didn't faze them, but they tried to intimidate him. And what they did next, like the next day after he had some words with them, and he actually just tapped the gate with his Jeep. A day or two later, someone put a dead rattlesnake across the front door of his cabin with its head cut off. And they obviously didn't know George very well, although he was older in age. That didn't do anything to calm him down whatsoever. So we would get together and talk about what to do next. And like I said, the authorities had been alerted over the years to this. Occasionally, when a real estate person would drive up, try to go up one of those roads that was heavily posted with manifestos along the way, these guys would come out and hold them at gunpoint. The real estate agent would call the police. The police would come out. Sometimes they'd take one of those guys and give him a night to cool off in the jail. But it never did anything to stop that kind of activity. Those of us that lived out there didn't let that kind of activity deter us from carrying on our normal life. Most of my pet cats over the years were killed in traps. Sometimes Booger and I would find them in the traps as we hiked around, especially around the edges of my property, which was their favorite place to do such things like this on purpose to try to intimidate me. I never let it intimidate me, but I lost a lot of my pets that way, especially my pet cats. Those of us that lived out there kept having little powwows about what to do. A lot of them were losing animals. Some of them had their dogs killed as well. And I always tried to keep the talk of any violence out of the conversation, because I knew that wasn't going to resolve anything. Everybody out there was heavily armed. Interestingly enough, the people on the south side of this conflict did not walk around armed. Those poachers always were heavily armed, and they just liked being armed all the time as a form of intimidation. If you got into words with them, they were quick to grab the pistol on their hip to try to scare you. But I can tell you that these people that lived back in here did not scare easily, and they weren't taken kindly to the entire subdivision being terrorized. So we had many, many long talks, and we knew we were on our own. These people had no fear of the law. In fact, one of their properties was lined with signs that said anyone uh, caught going past this will be shot, and that includes any chicken blank county sheriff, and you can fill in the blank. Uh, so yeah, that's how it was. And the local sheriff said, "Yeah, that's a motley crew out there, and you guys be careful." And we were like, "Wow, really? That's all? That's all the help you get is be careful." Now, one day in early December, I was down on the north end of my property. I was taking advantage of there not being a lot of snow on the ground yet, and was stacking up some firewood for the next season, running my chainsaw. And any kind of noise out there would always draw the attention of these guys. They would come to see who was doing what, and they drove slowly past me back and forth throughout the week I was down there, or a few days anyway, of stacking up some firewood for the next season, cutting down beetle killed pine, and letting it season for a year until the next season. Uh, about a day after I had finished stacking up probably 5 or 6 cords of wood down there, and after being intimidated by them driving past me very slowly within 100 feet, pointing their guns at me as they drove slowly past me, I did not let that slow me down a bit. I was used to their intimidating gestures at this point, and a couple of days following that, I was sitting out on my porch just having some coffee, or just sitting outside the cabin having some coffee. And I could hear someone loading up that wood on my property into the back of the truck. I went down there. It was the guy that I have mentioned earlier in the previous video that had pulled a gun on me. The first encounter I ever had with him, it had happened several times since. And I quickly told him to unload all of that wood and drive off my property. He argued me for a minute, but he eventually backed down and did that. And he had about a cord of wood stacked up in his truck by the time I got down there, and he unloaded every bit of it and drove away. And this picture right here was, we called her the mama kitty. She was found in a trap. So night or day, Booger always was out there sniffing the air, looking downhill for anything that could be happening, chasing coyotes off the property, or alerting me to any other predator, such as somebody setting a trap, which was not uncommon. And, they tried to do intimidating by just placing it feet off my property line, and I would have to go down there and have some words with them. It continued. So anyway, it was a December night, and Booger was outside, and it was starting to snow, and it was going to be a heavy snow for that time of December, which was not typical. And the snow was really coming down, but of course Booger liked to just be outside. He would lay down just outside the front door of my cabin, and he could just lay there and get covered up with snow and be completely happy. Sometimes you'd wake up in the morning and just see his nose sticking out of a little hole, and the rest of him would be completely covered with snow. And then when you'd come outside, he'd just stand up and shake all the snow off. It didn't get too cold for him, and it didn't snow too much for him. He just loved it. And leading into that snowstorm, and after my encounter just days earlier of running them off my property, stealing my firewood, there were threats made against me, and threats made against my animals. And the person who I had chased off my property was making threats that my animals were going to start dying here pretty quick. So I was on guard, and this particular night that I'm talking about, I was laying inside of the cabin on the couch with my girlfriend. We were just watching a movie. I would periodically just look outside to make sure Booger was okay. He always was. And then I looked out there and he was gone. I only saw the indentation right in front of the door in the snow where he had been sleeping. I stepped outside to look around just a little bit. There was almost 2 feet of fresh snow being laid down, and it was still snowing. And I saw his tracks going behind the cabin. I walked back behind the cabin to see, and I could see that the tracks were still going deeper into the forest. This was very unusual for him to do anything like that. During a snowstorm, there was nothing moving about. All animals just hunkered down during a snowstorm. They weren't out there doing anything other than what he was, just laying there getting covered with snow. So already being on guard from the threats that I was getting, I quickly jumped into action. And I went back in. I told my girlfriend, Booger is gone, and we must go find him. Now it was pitch dark, but even in the blackest of nights, I could navigate the property pretty well. I knew every step of that and every inch of that piece of property, night or day, snow or dry. It did not matter. And we came out of that cabin and started tracking Booger the best we could. The snow was still coming down. Some of his tracks were already covered up, so I knew it had been a while since he had wandered away from the cabin. And I had given my girlfriend a 1 million candlelight spotlight. And for those of you that know how powerful those are, they can light a place up, for a mile down the road if you have a, unobstructed view. They are extremely powerful spotlights. I gave her one of those. We weren't using it at the time, but we took it. And I also grabbed a shotgun from behind my front door, which was always there, along with my fire extinguisher. I had never been a gun person, but I always had that for some protection and hoped I would never need it. Just in the same vein, I hoped I would never need the fire extinguisher next to it. We started working our way towards that back road where Booger's tracks were leading to, and then I finally lost his tracks in the snow. They had been covered up, indicating he had been out there for a while. That was unlike any of his normal behavior. Did not know which way he might have turned, but I started just heading in the general direction that the tracks were still leading before I lost them. And right about that time, we were about probably 200 yards off that back road, and I could see vehicle lights coming up the road, and it was one of the trappers checking traps, and that's how they did it. They periodically would drive up and down that road every single day and night, and because they were lazy, they set their traps just feet off the road in either direction, and then they would just simply cruise by real slow to where they knew their traps were and shine a flashlight out there to see if there was anything that needed to be taken out of a trap. So although the truck was quite a ways down the road, the lights you could see for a mile, and it was stopping and then going. You know how they did. They would drive a couple hundred yards, stop, shine a flashlight from the comfort of their truck to see if it was worth getting out. If they saw nothing, they proceeded to the next trap. This 4-mile stretch was lined with traps, and it was just a factory for killing animals. There was, like I said, 6 people, so between the 6 of them, there was always somebody out there moving about, checking traps, killing thousands and thousands of animals over the years. And as it got closer to us, I told my girlfriend to stay behind this tree. We maneuvered down close to the road that we could get to without being seen by the truck lights. I had her tucked away behind a tree, and I said, I'm going to move down a little closer to the road. And then the car stopped, just about 100 yards away from where I was. And as it stopped, it turned its headlights up slightly to the right. And then there was Booger. And he was strung up in a snare trap. And the person in the truck just stopped. And I told my girlfriend, I said, if he gets out of that truck, I said, you keep your eye on me. And when I wave at you, and our eyes were fully adjusted to what a light was available without giving away our location. But I told her, if I wave your hands, or if I wave my hands rather, I want you to turn that spotlight on and shine it directly at the head of the person that comes out of that truck. So I kept maneuvering into a position I knew I wanted to be in. The person finally came out of the truck, and he was carrying a pistol, I could see by his headlights. And he slowly started walking up to Booger, who was struggling for breath but still alive. But he wasn't going anywhere. He was strung up tight in that snare trap. Now, snare traps, when an animal is caught in them around their neck, the more an animal struggles, the tighter that snare becomes. They cannot bust it any kind of way. It's a heavy-duty cable. And Booger had struggled at some point because he had cut off his airway to a pretty good degree to where he was having a hard time breathing. So as this guy approached Booger with a pistol in his hand, I became crystal clear of what I needed to do. And I maneuvered into a position that was going to be coming up from behind him. And then I waved when I knew I was in the right position to my girlfriend. She triggered the 1 million candlelight spotlight right on his head. I knew it would have the desired effect that it did. He would turn towards it, not be able to see anything. And I stepped right up behind him with shotgun in hand. And when I made my presence known to him, where I was just feet behind him, of course, he didn't even know I was there. He knew that I had the drop on him, if you want to call it that. I told him to drop his weapon, which he did, into the snow. He turned around to face me and quickly start groveling in a way to say he wasn't going to do any harm to Booger, which of course we knew that was not true. He knew that was not true. And he said he had a tool in his truck that he could cut Booger free. And I told him he better do that right now. And there was some words exchanged, mostly coming out of my mouth, which I won't repeat, so I don't have to change any of my settings on this channel for publication. But I was crystal clear that I had the situation under control and that it was going to be resolved. And he did leave his gun in the snow, go back to his truck. I kept a very close eye on him, walking with him in case he was going to try anything else. And he was a guy that would probably have more firearms in his vehicle. So I kept him under control to the point that I did see he grabbed a wrench or some heavy-duty wire cutters, cable cutters, out of his truck. He walked over there. He cut Booger free. Booger stretched a little bit. He wasn't bleeding. He was actually okay. He was very happy to see me. And then I had my last words with that particular poacher. Now, this is the poacher that had for years and years threatened me and threatened everybody else, these acts of intimidation. But tonight's where I decided to make my final stand and say that this would not stand anymore. And I told him that if any of my animals ever disappeared in the future or any harm came to anybody, that I would not be calling the sheriff, because that just never worked, but that I would be coming for him. And I got my point across very clearly. And over the next few days, over that incident, I talked to a couple of others to let them know that that type of activity was to stop. Now, they knew me and they knew that I was a peaceful man, and they always interpret that as a sign of weakness. But on this night, I made it very clear. Yeah, I'm a peaceful man, but I had been pushed to the point, and I had stopped other people from acting violently. I never did have to act violently. I was defending myself and my property, which I had a right to do. It wasn't my first choice to be that way, but push come to shove, I could not allow that to stand any further. And from that day forward, for the next few years that I was around out there, oh, how much longer was I out there? Probably another 6 or 7 years after that. I never had any problem with any of those poachers. Now, sadly, that activity did not change. They just stayed way clear of me. They stayed way clear of all of us on the south side. They focused their activities of carnage on that northern side of the road, and we really never had any more problems with them, although the activity and the wildlife uh, being killed off at an unbelievable amount of numbers, just unbelievable. That continued. That never did stop, sadly. And the Booger Man lived out his natural life there in the woods. Like Odie, he only made it to about 10 years old. They're both still out there where they belong. Booger lived his entire life out there from the time he was born to the time he died. Always the protector of everybody, and everybody just loved him. Anybody that ever came camping on the property, I always just said, well, if you're going to go hiking, you just take Booger with you and you'll be fine. And Booger would always, no matter who was with him, he was the great protector. He loved everybody. He loved all of his animals, and he lived a righteous life. Miss him too. Yeah, they just don't live long enough. Well, that's the story of the poachers. Yeah, a heck of a story. As even these pictures are fading, and even my memory is fading some of these things I'll never be able to forget. Aloha, you guys, and thanks for tuning in. Booger Man.